I alluded to this when I made my England versus Australia Ashes 25-26 Team of the Series video, when I included Mitchell Starc in at the number 7 position. My Team of the Series didn't really include any all-rounders. England only brought 3 to the series, those being Ben Stokes, Jacob Bethell and Will Jacks. Australia themselves only brought 2 in Cameron Green and Beau Webster. And of those players mentioned, Bethell wasn't guaranteed a spot in the starting 11 anyway, and he only played 2 tests. Will Jack's inclusion from the start was an eyebrow raiser, as I quite literally just did. And as for Australia, well, Beau Webster probably should have played more than just the 1 test that he did. Now, aside from England and Australia for a second, let's look across the world and see if we can find any genuine world-class all-rounders in Test cricket in 2026. Starting with South Africa, my mind immediately jumps to Marco Jansen, and to a somewhat lesser extent, but still worth mentioning, Aiden Markram. From India, we have the irreplaceable Ravindra Jadeja and the kind of new to the team, but still established at this point, Washington Sundar. New Zealand have a few, to be fair. They've got Mitchell Santner, Glenn Phillips, Rachin Ravindra, and to a lesser extent, but still worth mentioning, Michael Bracewell. As for the West Indies, there's Roston Chase, but not really anyone else. Pakistan has Salman Aliaga and Sri Lanka has Dhananjaya De Silva. However, those last 2 guys have pretty subpar bowling figures. They much more lean towards the batting side of the game. Some of you may have noticed something while I was going through that list of players, and that's that none of them really are that young. Not only that, but there's only really one arguably world-class elite standout all-rounder left in the format, and that's Ravindra Jadeja, who is probably going to retire in a year now. So when it comes to Test cricket as it is in 2026, we're not only lacking in all-rounders right now, but we're lacking in the next generation of all-rounders. Cricketers are becoming specialists in their chosen areas, and gone seem to be the days of Andrew Flintoff and Garfield Sobers. But why is that? First of all, let's take a moment to consider what an all-rounder actually is. The short explanation is this: an all-rounder is a player who is equally as good at batting as they are bowling. A jack of all trades, but arguably a master of none. A player considered good enough to bat higher up the order, as well as bowl as a frontline seamer or spinner. And finally, a player who can turn a game on its head regardless of where they are in the innings or the condition. Prime examples from the past include Sir Ian Botham, who was the first player ever to achieve both 5,000 runs and 300 wickets in Test cricket. India's Kapil Dev took that to the next level when he achieved 5,000 runs and 400 wickets in Test cricket. Former Pakistan all-rounder and actually Prime Minister too, Imran Khan, was batting at an average of 52 and bowling at an average of 19 at the peak of his powers. And let's not forget Kiwi all-rounder Richard Hadlee, who, out of all the names I've just mentioned, had the career best bowling figures with an average of 22.3 in tests. As Test cricket moved into the 1990s and the 2000s, we saw the likes of Jacques Kallis, Sean Pollock and Freddie Flintoff again carrying the mantle of an all-rounder on their backs. But more so than just simply the style of player was changing, the style of cricket was changing. This was the era when one-day internationals really began to take their place at almost the forefront of modern cricket. For the first time since their inception, ODIs weren't a sideshow anymore, they were a full-time format. Teams weren't just preparing for a test overseas, they were preparing for a full series, including both ODIs and tests. ODIs began carrying arguably almost as much weight as the test series themselves. Almost, but probably not as much prestige, but more importantly, ODIs generated revenue. The impact on the players was noticeable. They were expected to perform at their highest, recover faster than ever, and play multiple different formats of cricket, sometimes within the same week. And who felt that pressure most acutely? All-rounders. Around the time of ODIs gaining more popularity and traction, cricketing standards and fitness standards improved on the whole massively. Cricket leveled up and became more professional, with players being granted central contracts. Sports scientists began to get involved. Training and fitness programs were introduced. Fast bowlers bowled harder, batters spent more times in the nets. And the revelation from all of this was a bit of a culture shock to the sport. That being that if you demand the most of a player all the time, it comes with a risk. If you are good enough to be considered a frontline bowler, your team wants to protect you for that job. If you're good enough to open or play at 3 or 4 as a batter, your team wants to protect you for that job. The last thing that coaches and selectors wanted was a team full of injured players who have been bowling and batting at their peak across several different formats for the last couple of months. They began to look at their squad selections and actually think, what is this player here for? Fast forwarding a few years, and now we herald the arrival of T20s, another even shorter format of cricket where mistakes came to the forefront. Suddenly, matches were a lot shorter and the margin for error became a lot more noticeable. This game wasn't about balance, this game was about impact. And then we have the franchise leagues, the IPL, the Big Bash, the Blast, the CPL, I could go on and on. These leagues and this format of cricket have had a massive, undeniable impact on the sport. Players were no longer just being selected for a team, they were being selected because they fulfilled a specific role. You have death bowlers, power play hitters, middle over specialists. Suddenly, the selectors weren't looking at players who can do everything, they're looking at players for very specific reasons. What does this player do and how good are they at doing it? Players now began juggling multiple formats of cricket all around the world at pretty much every stage of the calendar year. Fitness and injuries went from being a concern to being the concern. To this day, we still hear top players omitting themselves from IPLs and CPLs and to a lesser extent the 100. Oh, by the way, I'm gonna have a video out hopefully within the next couple of weeks specifically about the 100, so make sure you subscribe and turn the bell on and some other stuff, I don't know. Anyway, all-rounders at this point are sitting right in the middle of the danger zone, not knowing to commit to a format, to their country, to their franchise leagues. It became a real headache for the all-rounder. Format-specific skill sets have really erupted over the last decade or two. Batting in T20 is, as we know, vastly different from batting in a test match. In T20, you need power, shot variation, and the ability to know when to capitalize on a really bad ball. And as for bowlers, you require several variations for your deliveries, as well as data-driven strategic plans, knowing exactly how to get each and every batter out. Trying to master this way of thinking across all of the leagues and all of the formats around the entire calendar year just kind of became a little bit impossible. So what changed? Batters stopped bowling and bowlers stopped batting. Or did they? Let's not be too hasty here, because all-rounders haven't completely disappeared. All-rounders do still exist, they're just even more highly prized and sought after now than they were 30 years ago. Now, I've already mentioned a couple of these guys before, but Ben Stokes, Ravindra Jadeja, Mitch Santner, Hardik Pandya. These guys are all modern examples of high-class all-rounders, but a few of those names come with big asterisks. Let's look at Ben Stokes, for example. The guy is injury-prone to say the least, to the point where he regularly pulls out of tournaments. He hasn't played in the last 2 seasons of the 100, despite it being Britain's premier marketing cricket, whatever event you want to call it. But despite Stokes being a talented, generational athlete, England manage his workload obsessively. His bowling is limited, his time in the nets is limited, he doesn't play all the formats anymore, but like the phoenix on his arm, Stokes always finds a way to rise from the ashes. Jadeja also has an asterisk over his name, that being that his overs are monitored to the nth degree by the BCCI, and the fact that, as I said earlier, he's probably due to retire any time now. Hardik Pandya stepped away from Test cricket entirely and now specialises in ODI and T20 only. Bowling fast and batting hard year-round is just not sustainable, so the all-rounder hasn't disappeared, they've just adapted. Cricket might have narrowed its definitions on certain styles of play, but by expanding its variety of ways to play, it hasn't erased the need for versatility. Long, arduous, grueling tours, exposed shallow squads, and the need for flexibility To go back to my earlier example of the Ashes series that just concluded a few months ago, Will Jacks played 3 out of the 5 tests, and honestly, who saw that coming? And when pitches flatten or conditions change, captains still reach for players who can turn the game on its head, not just specialise in a certain role. And there's another reason for optimism for all-rounders, and that is cricket is a cyclical sport. Trends come and go, and what rewards the game today almost certainly won't reward the game in a few years' time. The same forces that push the game towards specialisation could swing back in favour of versatility, especially if teams start to see how volatile hyper-specialised teams can be. Necessity has always been one of cricket's greatest coaches, so the question maybe shouldn't be, is the all-rounder dead? Maybe the question should be, what is a modern all-rounder? Because all-rounders didn't necessarily disappear, they just evolved. And in a game that itself is constantly evolving, reinventing themselves might just be the way that all-rounders keep themselves alive.